All right. Welcome back to MedTech Jam Session with Chris and Mike D.
Hey, everyone.
I'm Mike Donahue.
I'm Chris Lyons. We're ready for another one.
We are ready for another one. These have been so much fun, Chris.
They have been a blast.
I have learned so much, too. I just think
absolutely.
The opportunity to speak with both entrepreneurs and one that's coming up soon, investors.
Yes, definitely.
Really the whole ecosystem. If you are interested in the startup community, if you're a big company employee and just want to learn, this is a master class, because what you're hearing is nuggets and information and stories from
the ground level.
Exactly. From the entrepreneurs who are in the arena.
Yes.
So we have another gladiator in the arena to join us today. But let's first talk, Chris, about, I want to ask you a question around investor sentiment, investor goals, and what the investment community, as you see it now, is looking for, specifically around companies that have maybe a shorter path to market, like a 510K, but maybe not as much differentiation compared to something that frankly does take a little bit longer to get to market, like a clinical trial or an IDE, et cetera, but has maybe something that's highly differentiated, of course, which precipitates that. Yeah. What are the investors saying as you are pitching those different types of companies?
Absolutely, Mike. The market, as it is right now, the investors are waiting for past investment exits. That is a big theme because they've either maxed out the funds, okay, or their LPs are bringing and coming to the table, especially in the realm of a VC. They're not putting more money into future funds until they see wins from what has been invested, which means exits need to move the day. Exits. And I'm bullish on that because of the fact that I have been seeing a lot of it. And I think 2025 is going to be a ramping. 2024 was a let's test it and see. And it proved to be very positive in the realm of exits. 2025 is okay, let's go bigger than we did. And 2026, and hopefully, is going to be a whole nother level. So, how do you navigate the waters as a startup, right? As you're working through, and back to your point about a 510K versus an IDE, what are investors thinking? Well, one of the biggest things I think that they are is that because of everything I just explained, they're going to be more serious about 510K products because that can be in and out, meet their mandates, get it done. However, I will say too that in all the investor discussions, I think I've got 10 different meetings set up this week with investors. In every single one of these, they're making it pretty clear that they're coming off the sidelines. So you got this mixed bag, and it's like, well, you're not going to know the answers until you engage with the people to provide them and then get them in front of these smaller companies, so that they can make their decisions to do so. It's an exciting time, but it's also, we are the worst when it comes to patience.
Right.
And one of the strongest qualities any CEO of a startup has is patience and long suffering. And if they can roll with that, they're going to do well.
For sure. Yeah. And I think companies need to be as capital efficient as possible.
No doubt.
I think gone are the days when you can just spend like a drunken sailor.
Yeah. And there's more and more CEOs that I know for a fact not taking salaries or whatever the case may be to make sure that the launch happens at the time that they need it to happen, that the revenue production happens in the manner that they need it to happen. But you've got to invest in inventory and you've got to build that so that you're ready for those times.
For sure. Well, this is a perfect lead-in for our guest today, Ben Holmes from Nanochon, as he is embarking on a clinical challenge that is personally relevant to me, having just gotten back from my midday run and my knees are really sore. And I'm a man of a certain age. I won't say how old I am, 55. Yeah. I don't want to have a knee replacement anytime soon. And the opportunity where there's a minimally invasive approach to treating cartilage injuries, focal defects, et cetera.
Yes.
It's something that the market has been asking for, desiring, and wanting for a long time. And to your point, being able to pitch and grind and land investors and make them believe in your story, even though it's a long-term story, and to go on a longer journey with you,
Yes.
requires a lot of moxie.
It does.
Welcome to the stage, our friend Holmes. Nanochon.
Ben, you're looking good, man.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Same to you guys.
Yeah, we're good. So you're straight out of your child's nursery, I see.
That's right. As we were chatting about, Nanochon is a very capital efficient company. We are currently sharing a workspace with my daughter, who is
I love it. This is where the best stories begin. We know this.
Yes.
Are those like leopards or tigers in the background? I think that might be scary.
Yeah, they're leopards in a jungle. And I got to say, my daughter's name is Blair. She is a very brave young lady, and she's very enamored with those leopards. So no fear, just delight.
Love it.
I love it too. Well, Ben, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're building at Nanochon? I teed it up for you, given that my knees are older than I wish they were. Tell us a little about how you got plugged into entrepreneurship, maybe to start with, and then how Nanochon started and where you are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to talk about my entrepreneurial journey, it's something that's really captivated me for a very long time. I have an undergraduate background in mechanical engineering, and then I have a graduate background in biomedical engineering. And when I was doing my undergraduate degree, we had to take a senior design course in our fourth year. And that senior design course entailed, in addition to working on a kind of a group capstone project, also a lot of guest speakers came through the class. And one of the guest speakers was actually a relatively young gentleman who was the CEO and the founder of a medical device startup. He was based out of Richmond, but it was something that he had actually developed during his capstone in this very same class, maybe 5 or 6 years prior. Had found funding, had developed it into a product, and they were going through the regulatory process, and he just shared his journey. And I just remember watching him speak and talk about the experience and talk about the gratification of bringing an idea to life and starting his own company, and kind of thinking, wow, that just seems so fantastic. I wish I could do something like that, but I don't really have any good ideas. So whatever. And I just filed it away in my brain, and I graduated. I went to go work for a big construction design firm here in the Washington, D.C. area. And I didn't really love the work. It was a way to make a paycheck, but I didn't really like the field. I didn't really find the work gratifying. And I always knew I wanted to get back into the medical field. And so after a couple of years of working in engineering, construction, and design, I decided to go back for a graduate degree in biomedical engineering. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something in medical devices. And I actually had a lot of interest in regenerative medicine. And so I applied to 5 or 6 different programs that all had different focuses. And I ended up going to George Washington here in DC because they had just brought on a couple bright young professors, put them into tenure track, and brought them in specifically to do biomaterials, regenerative medicine. And so it was just right place, right time for me. And I ended up joining the tissue engineering lab. And that lab had a particular interest in musculoskeletal work. So I was originally supposed to just get a master's. I, at the time, thought I would get a master's degree and then go work for like a Medtronic or a Stryker in the field developing products. But I just really fell in love with the research, and I really fell in love with the work. And so my PI and I were both mutually delighted that I wanted to stay. And she brought me in and let me matriculate into a PhD student. And then that was the point at which entrepreneurship came back into my life, because the university at that time, and this would have been back in 2013, was right when I made that switch, was really starting to invest heavily in supporting entrepreneurship at a time where they were a little bit ahead of the curve. I feel like every university is really taking it seriously and trying to put resources into it. But at the time, it was really like, if you weren't in Boston or you weren't in the Bay Area, nobody was really putting efforts into these types of programs, even just 10 years ago. So I really got the benefit of early access to programming at a time where there weren't a lot of students competing to get into these types of mentorship programs. I got a lot of unfettered access to really experienced mentors and experienced entrepreneurs and people that the university had brought into the ecosystem, again, at a time where their calendars were not filling up. So I was able to just get a lot of guidance and advice and knowledge early on while I was continuing to research materials for implantables and looking at things in the MSK space. And then I think the real shift happened for me when I got approached to be in a cohort of something called the I-Core program, which there's a lot of different flavors of it now, but for your listeners who aren't familiar, I-Core started as a National Science Foundation program to basically teach technical founders and inventors how to be entrepreneurs and how to run and manage startups. And it really explicitly focused on product market fit. And so the way they teach that is they take these engineers, which are used to being introverted, you're used to being very contemplative and introspective, and said, hey, you have to go out into the real world and you have to physically talk to 100 people that you think are your customers. You have to have, they use scientific words, so they're like, you have to have a hypothesis, which basically means, why is somebody going to buy your product? Do you actually solve a problem for them? And specifically, do you solve a value problem for them? And you have to actually go and have those discussions and collect data and collect feedback. So going through that program, one, it brought me all the way back to that starting point for me, which was all the way back in undergrad. And then it also allowed me to really engage with surgeons, which I had not really ever done before. Again, being on the R&D side of things in an engineering lab, academically speaking, we had a thought, a theory about what the field needed, but we did not engage with surgeons very much outside of a couple limited partnerships. So getting able to talk to a bunch of them and really understand how they're practicing medicine and what their issues were just really made something click for me. And I had gone through the program alongside another gentleman, Dr. Nathan Castro, who's my co-founder in Nanochon. So we both had adjacent technologies and approaches to cartilage and bone regeneration that we were pursuing. And after we both went through this program independently, we put our heads together and thought, well, I think there's things that I'm doing that make sense. There's things he's doing that make sense. Can we combine them together? And can we try to build a product that actually has the best chance of potentially succeeding in the market one day? So I graduated from the PhD program in 2016, in January 2016. We went to a lawyer's office that week and filed the paperwork for forming the original LLC that became Nanochon. And since then, I think we've had a pretty typical medtech story, which is to say it's been exciting, but there's been a tremendous amount of up and downs. Early on, I think our ideas and the technology were very nascent.
Right.
I think that's one of the things I've learned along the way, is that they perhaps were too nascent to warrant us starting the company as early as we did. However, I think it really forced us to adapt and learn and be aggressive. And we were able successfully to get a lot of non-dilutive funding on our own. So the first 3 years of the company, we were funded by some small research grants. We also got into the top level version of that I-Core that NSF runs directly. So we also went through proper NSF I-Core, and that comes with money. And then we also got SBIR funding. So that grant funding allowed us to take that nascent technology, do the translational animal studies, do a lot of characterization, perfect the design, and then also do pilot studies in large animals. And then we were getting ready to raise our first round of true investor institutional capital. It was going to be our first seed round. And this was toward the end of 2019 that we started going out for that. And then 2020 happened. So I'll be very brutally honest and say the first half of 2020 was very stressful, a lot of soul searching. But what I came to realize, and I think with hindsight, I realize now, we were a young company that didn't have a huge footprint, a lot of employees, a big burn rate. We didn't have commercial contracts that got canceled or had to be paused. We didn't have a clinical trial that had to be paused because of COVID. So psychologically, it was very stressful. But the reality is the company was able to just sit in stasis. And then at the end of 2020, when things turned back on again, we were able to refresh some of those conversations we were having. And then we were able to resume the process. We had a lead investor for that seed round by the summer of 2021. And then we were closing the round in a first close by the fall of that year. And so that really allowed us to invest in manufacturing, invest in additional product development and validation, and then also do our large animal proof of safety and efficacy. And so that was in horses. It was a 12-month study in horses. So along the way, we've completed that study. We got great results from it. We also raised additional capital starting at the end of 2023, ended up closing more capital throughout last year, and then we're at the tail end of closing at a bridge round now. So originally we were planning on going on raising what we were going to call a Series A. It was maybe going to be like $7 or $8 million. We were going to open that up in early 2023. And then again, these forces external to us and our company and our technology came crashing into our world again. And my only regret with that round is that I think in March, I started to feel like maybe that Series A wasn't going to be possible. And I wish then is when we pivoted. Instead, we waited to May. But ultimately, it was fine. But in May, we made the decision to say, hey, like, Series A is not going to happen. So we need to make the decision now to really strip out all the things we wanted to do and just think about what's the most essential next milestone for us and how can we get there. And for us, because we're a PMA device, so we're a highly regulated device,
Right.
for us, that was proof of concept data in human patients. So we basically just said, hey, like, if we do this somewhere in the world where it's going to be cheap and we get it going really quickly, and maybe we only treat 5 patients, what's the smallest amount of money that we can raise? And so we had pretty humble goals. We were just trying to raise $1.5 million. We ended up closing 1.8 in a first close. And then we were actually really fortunate to get a larger venture partner to come on board with $1 million check at the very end of 2023. And then we had a couple other closes throughout 2024. So we ended up raising 4.5 total all throughout that seed 2 round, although we had to do it over 4 closes spread out over about 8 or 9 months. And then again, we made the decision to go out for a bridge round late last year, and we're close to closing that out, which is a $1.5 million note. So it's like over time, with a lot of effort, we've been able to get closer back to what we originally thought we needed. And that's also allowed us to be a little bit more aggressive. And like with the clinical data, we're a couple months out from starting a first human study. So we are doing a full EFS, not just a handful of patients in a pilot, and being able to do that to GCP standards so we can eventually submit that to the FDA as our safety study. So we've been able to build on that original capital base, but that's, I think, really how we've adapted. I'll also say that starting out early on with grant funding and grant dollars rather than investor dollars, I think taught us how to be really capital efficient. I think that you have to have a tremendous amount of discipline when you're spending, especially when you get to the point where you're getting federal dollars. There's a lot of accounting and there's a lot of reporting. And I think all of that was really good training for how to responsibly manage money once we actually started to get funding.
So you guys, you actually, with the bridge, you'll be at 6 of funding, not including the grants, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So we'll have had 9.7 million raised to date, and $1 million of that is non-dilutive, because we actually also got some additional non-dilutive funding last year to do some continuing R&D through a program in the state of Virginia.
Way to stick to it. Way to stick to it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for
practical, Ben. What are some practical tips for other investors doing this? What was the profile of the investors that you were calling on? Talk a little bit about that process, if you would, because I think a lot of people are in your shoes now and could benefit from your experience.
No doubt.
Yeah. I think the reality is that some of the big venture funds that are the household names in medtech and med device really go at later stages. If they're not going commercial, they're going post-clinical. So, and that, despite what everyone says about the market conditions expanding and contracting over the last 5 years, people told me that in 2016. So I think that at least for PMA devices, that's always been true. Yeah. So we always went into this with our eyes open, like to get that type of a venture investor, we're going to have to show some significant progress. So I spent a lot of time talking to angel groups, and I think roughly half of our funding has actually come from angels, whether it's organized groups or just individuals who are angel investors. But I think I've always been really good, and my team's always been really good at getting, true early stage venture partners to anchor our deal, and then using that credibility and that diligence to then fill out the round with angels and other types of investors. Family offices as well are in the milieu, or high net worth individuals that can write a little bit bigger checks than an angel can. So that's what our strategy is: try to find venture partners that truly do go at the early stage. So people that are writing $500,000 to $2 million type checks, but who have a lot of credibility in the space and a lot of experience and a lot of capacity to do diligence. Because I think ultimately That's what it comes down to. If you talk about the way angel groups work, they're seeing all kinds of things. Like there's very few angel groups that are specific to life science or med tech.
Right.
And so they usually have like a physician, and he might not even be in your area. Like I'm lucky that I have some groups where they actually had orthopedic surgeons, and orthopedic surgeons seem to like joining these groups. I talked to groups where it's like they had an MD who was an ophthalmologist, and that MD was the one who was reviewing all the life science deals, or they might have a cardiologist or a cardiothoracic surgeon or something like that. So there's usually one or two people that the large group of, whether it's 100 or 200 or 300 angels, is relying on. So I think when you're talking to an angel group, you have to make sure you get connected with that person.
Yes.
And you have to make sure you convince them that it works and get them to a point where they understand what you're doing, so they can then pound the table with the rest of the group.
Yes.
You're not going to have a lot of traction just presenting, I think, to the broader group unless that person understands it and say, yes, I really want to do this. So we did that very well. And then also, like I said, making sure we also targeted some of those anchor investors who could do really deep diligence and then share it with those others. I think that also really helped. And then finally, just approaching surgeons directly through our various networks and getting some surgeons to invest, because that just always looks good on the cap table. If you've been able to convince some of your potential customers to invest in the company, that also goes a long way, I think, with convincing very early investors that there's a real opportunity and there's a real credibility to what you're doing.
That's excellent. And I concur with every single thing you've said. The big thing that I think every startup would sit here and think about is, okay, well, Ben, tell us, what was the average time from initial discussion with the potential investor to money in the bank?
So for those larger check writers, those venture partners, 8 months. And I think that's true of everyone who's written me a big check, and a big check is something more than $500,000. 8 months, maybe 9 months to actually go from I've met you, we're starting to talk, to I'm writing you a check. Now, what I will say, though, is that if you efficiently and smartly engage those kind of like angel investors and more of those syndicate type investors and get them warmed up, when those big people write the check, then it rolls over pretty quickly. So the first round, like in the first round, once I had the term sheet from the lead, like I said, it was about 3 months to corral everybody and get enough to close. I think this last round we raised, though, was pretty unusual, because it actually started with a substantial reinvestment from insiders. So that initial 1.8 I mentioned, I think 1.4 of that was from my inside investors. But then once that new venture partner came in for the $1 million check, and it took us 8 months to get their check. Once I got their check, then other people that were wanting to syndicate came in. And again, it was like about 3 or 4 months to close all of them.
Yep. I'll tell you, I don't have enough fingers to count on relative to the number of startups that will come even to me and go, we would really like to get funding in this quarter. And I'm like, okay, guys, look, there's a process to this, and a process of engagement. And it's raising funds is a great way to teach you how to dance with the ones that you need, which teaches you how to dance even better with the eventual strategic acquirer.
And customers.
And customers,
As a technical founder, Ben, you're now in sales and have been in sales since you called on your first investor, even grant writer.
Yeah, I love that. I love putting that perspective on it, because that's some really good advice I got early on from someone who mentored me from one of the strategics, but they themselves had been a successful serial entrepreneur. And they said, Ben, like, all you got to remember, yes, like you have to have a convincing story about the technology, you have to have a convincing story about the market, but ultimately you are selling a product to these investors, and that's buying a piece of your company will create a return. And so basically that's what they said. You are selling your company to people that are looking to get something out of it. And so I think keeping that in the front of your mind, something that's always helped me, and I would impart that wisdom to anyone.
How often do you personally wrestle as you're bringing the money in with the idea of dilution?
Yeah, honestly, I don't worry about it too much, right?
Good behavior. That's good.
Yeah. I really don't worry about it too much. I think control and trust is more important. And again, I think I was lucky to have a pretty sophisticated investor lead my first round, who put together really reasonable bylaws and chain of decision provisions that protect everybody. Because I think what you don't want is you don't want the investors to fully be in the driver's seat. And again, I think sophisticated investors don't want that either.
Right.
They really want it to be a partnership, but it is something to look out for. So I would say to anybody trying to decipher a term sheet, think more about control and less about dilution.
100%. Man, you've got all the answers.
Yeah, exactly.
At least so far.
I can take you to this point, right?
That's right.
Ben, it looks like you've spent some time with a couple of different incubators, accelerators, different programs like that also invested. I think I saw J&J, maybe Plug and Play. Talk a little bit about your experience there. And is that something that worked out well for you? What did you learn? Pros, cons?
Yeah, I would say generally incubators and accelerators are a really great way to gain access to some of that customer discovery information, because we didn't stop after doing I-Core. We've always sought to engage actively with the clinical community every year. So going through these programs can, again, help you do that, help you be structured about it, and also keep you accountable. Because it can be difficult to focus sometimes. So I think these programs are really good at that. It can also just be a really great way to expand your network. The reality is I've never worked in this industry professionally outside of being in Nanochon. And I didn't work for Stryker, or I didn't work for Arthrex in the cartilage biologics division. So these programs, if you put energy into them, it can be a really great way to expand your network and kind of grow your network and make up for what you might lack coming into the entrepreneurial role, having not explicitly worked in industry. I think where they don't work, or maybe where they fall short, is you really have to go in with your eyes open about, especially on the accelerator side, about what kind of hard resources you're going to get, and really capital. Because a lot of them will say, oh, we have a great investor network and companies, our alumni have raised so much money. But a lot of the time, most of these programs are talking about what have our alumni done in perpetuity after graduating.
Exactly.
So I think going to them with your eyes open, you're not going to necessarily walk away with a big check. Although, again, I picked up people that have invested in us through going through all of these programs. So you will meet people, and it is a good place to meet investors, but it's a great place to start the conversation. Very few companies walk out of it immediately with money. But I think if you approach it with tailored expectations, like I said, as a way to grow your network, a way to get exposure, even just practice, like getting practice, giving your presentation, getting honest, constructive feedback about your pitch.
Yes,
that's helpful.
These programs are a really collaborative and safe environment to do that. We can really hone your story. So I think that they're great. And yeah, we've gone through one almost every year since we founded the company. I think this is the first year we will not be participating in one, actually.
You've probably grown out of that stage.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Like at a certain point, like we've talked to enough strategics, I've talked to enough payers, I've talked to plenty of surgeons. Like I think our story is very tight, and now it's just all about executing. So,
and you definitely have crawled out of the crib. You're off and running now, ma'am.
Well, again, I love that analogy too, because my daughter just started walking last week. So I'm going to take that as a sign.
Well, something that's interesting is that the model you explained is spot on relative to the market we're in today. And this market goes through these shifts and these changes, right? If you were doing this 15, 20 years ago, you could exit potentially just with some human data. And you could have gotten a lot more funding and all these kind of things. And so we go with the ebbs and flows, and we help people understand that it's imperative. The timing is now. You're not living then. You're not living in what has been. All right. It could be better down the road. That's great. But what are we doing about what we've been given right now? And so I think you're doing this very well.
Well, thank you. I
sure.
really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure, Ben. Why don't you now tell us, what are you building and why are you building it? What problem are you solving? Who is it for?
Oh, yeah, that part.
When is it going to help my sore 55-year-old knees?
Well, Mike, I think Mike should stop running first and just walk.
Boo.
There's different camps. I get it.
Well, I will say that we're at a stage now where we engage with a lot of patients, and people don't want to give up their active lifestyles. Okay, so for people that are new to Nanochon or just hearing me talk for the first time, we're building a next generation implantable medical device for treating cartilage damage and loss in joints. And really, we're addressing what the industry has been referring to for the last 35 or so years as the holy grail of orthopedics. And that's, can you actually effectively treat these cartilage defects when they're at a more moderate stage before they progress to advanced joint disease and people necessitating a knee replacement. Ultimately, by the time most people get to that point of getting a joint arthroplasty, it's not just the cartilage that's gone. The subchondral bone that's underneath the cartilage has been diseased and degenerating for years. You have other deterioration in the meniscus, which is the other side of the joint. You can have severe biomechanical changes to people's gait and how the joint is moving. So if you can address those cartilage damage, those areas of cartilage damage earlier when they're contained and the disease hasn't really spread to the rest of the joint, you can effectively kind of head things off at the pass. So that's really the goal. It's to capture anybody from 20-year-old athlete that, and I'm speaking a little bit out of pocket, 22 specifically, not a pediatric patient, someone in their 20s who's an athlete who's fallen on the field, they've twisted their knee and they've torn a piece of cartilage, all the way up to somebody who's maybe 55 or 60. They're on the line of being old enough for a knee replacement, but they really don't have a lot of other problems other than cartilage is damaged. So if there was something effective that could treat them and repair that defect and allow them to keep functioning at a high activity level, that would really provide the best outcome for people, because that's the other challenge with knee replacements. I mean, they're really not designed to replace the joint of an active 35, 40, or 50-year-old. They're just designed to get someone who's probably a senior citizen just walking and moving again when they've been in so much pain that they can't move. And you know, what's really alarming is that if you look at the trends in total joint replacement, I think maybe 5 or 6 years ago, it actually replaced, or it surpassed the hip replacement as the most widely done elective surgery. At the same time, I think the knee replacement is still in the bottom 3 for patient-reported satisfaction. So a whole lot more knee replacements on a lot of people that are not very happy with the fact that they got treated with them. And then also that median age of the knee replacement keeps dropping. And so there's you've seen some articles in the press over the last 2 years about this, and there's sort of like a little bit of a tug of war happening now where the knee replacement specialists are like, oh, this is great. We can just do knee replacements on younger people. We can keep treating more patients. But I think, you know, much to the benefit of the patient, the sports medicine community has really pushed back on that. And these are not surgeons who are doing a high churn of knee replacements, but rather they're specialists doing arthroscopic or minimally invasive treatments on these younger patients. And they're really our customers. So I also want to broadcast that we're not planning on stacking this up as a true alternative to the knee replacement. Not that there couldn't be clinical utility there, but I think what we learned through going through all these programs and talking to all these surgeons is that sports medicine doctors and clinicians are just really hungry for something that can provide a much better outcome for their patients, but also be faster, cheaper, more efficient, easy to use. Because right now their options are really surgical techniques, and a lot of people have heard of microfracture, but microfracture wears out in 2 years. So you're getting a microfracture and then you're in pain again. And you can't just keep microfracturing the same location. You basically get to do that once, and then you got to treat it with something more invasive. And then there's a lot of debate about what can we do for people after they've had a microfracture. The options, at least in the US, are cadaveric allograft or some of these cell therapy products. And the cadaveric allograft is just transplanting cartilage and bone just like you would an organ harvested from a cadaver. So there's the same problems, cost, very limited supply of tissue. So they're really only reserved for the most severe or marginal patients. And then cell therapy products, I think their claims maybe are controversial, or some of them are really just repackaged versions of much older technology. Like some of them are the second or third time they've changed hands from one big strategic to another. Somebody who used to sell it in the 90s wanted to get out of the industry, so they sold it to a different company that wanted to get into orthopedics. So they might sound cutting edge, but they themselves are 30. Some of them are 30 more or plus 30 plus years old. That's what I'm trying to say. So there's a lot of appetite, both on the patient side, but then also very much on the provider side for more solutions. And I think what's interesting is that payers are also starting to signal that they really want to see new solutions in the space. Now, I'm not going to claim that they're starting to get really permissive with coverage. At the same time, I've been on a couple panels, and I've talked to some of them, and MSK long-term, like MSK disease in general, is a big driver of cost, especially for private insurers. And so they're starting to think a little bit more critically about this and trying to figure out how they can support products and innovation. So
Yeah.
I think it's just
one of the things I was going to tell you, and I think this is spot on, is that when you're a startup, as you are, okay, one of the coolest things as specific to Nanochon is that you are a market opener. And I think that's something that people start to embrace more. I'm going to date myself by saying this, but when I stepped into the industry, the average age for total knee replacement was 59. And that is shifting rapidly south. And for all kinds of various reasons, we won't get into it here, but it's the more technologies like you that bring these things to the market, okay, continue to push that ultimatum. We've got to take care of the patient in their entire continuum of care. And I love that. But what you're going to have to do along the way, as a little piece of advice, is help the strategics understand you're not trying to cannibalize their business.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, the innovator's dilemma is a thing.
Yeah. And again, I think that the way we position this is to capture patients at this intermediate stage where they really can't get a knee replacement. And I think you're right. I think that's great advice for anyone who is very early in their entrepreneurial journey or thinking of starting a startup is, can you position your product in such a way that it's truly meeting the market need and the market demand, but you're adding to the business of a potential acquirer or a strategic. You're not,
100%.
like you said, not cannibalizing something else that they might really enjoy revenue from.
That's right.
You're creating a new
and that's just the reality of having to thread the needle, because ultimately the goal is to get this to the patient.
Yeah.
And I view all of this as just, these are the things you have to navigate to ensure that happens.
You're doing a good job with
what
the
makes it different, Ben? Tell us about the tech. What makes it different? Many companies have tried and not succeeded. So what makes Nanochon different?
Yeah, I think to go all the way back to the lab, we were really interested in pursuing technologies that actually had a definite biologic and biotherapeutic effect, but were not drugs or drug delivery platforms or cell biologics. Really what we were looking at was leveraging sort of some of the known pathways that stem cells and progenitor cells and other kind of cells have in the musculoskeletal system for regenerating, but like specifically by responding to mechanical environments. So that's where we started. And I think that what really differentiates us now that we've matured our product is that it's something that's been demonstrated in these substantial large animal models to rehab both the cartilage and the bone. So it actually regrows something, but catalyzes that regeneration. But the implant itself doesn't have to sacrifice mechanical stability, because I think a lot of people, even now, others that are looking at addressing this problem in different ways than us, are either really focused on something that regenerates or something that replaces. And I think what we've been able to do is develop a technology that can actually act as the replacement. It's a biomaterial that mimics the properties of cartilage, so it can actually act as a structural replacement right away. And that early mechanical stability is really critical for not just supporting long-term healing, but just stopping the spread of degeneration from the defect out, and also allowing for faster rehab, because people might not know this, but some of those existing techniques that are done today by sports medicine surgeons require really involved recovery protocol, anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks of non-weight bearing. So that means you're completely off your knee before you can even start rehab. And then the rehab process becomes pretty lengthy after that. So we've got something that can basically act as that replacement immediately, but then it does act as this bedrock for regrowing cartilage over time. So I think that's really critical. We've developed a technology that from a clinical perspective, you get both. You don't have to choose one or the other. I also think that it's really critical that we've been able to design our implant in such a way that it gets this mechanical stability, it gets this really good fixation when it's surgically implanted, but we haven't had to incorporate metal, which is also something that was still in the churn of development. And I think that the reason that's important is because, yes, we know this, that if you screw a metal screw into distressed bone, you'll get an alleviation of pain for the patient. But what happens is longer term, there's degeneration, there's a response in that bone around the metal, and 5 years out, you've got a big nasty bone cyst developing around the metal. And so I think that that's something that has been really important to the surgeons that we've worked with, is that we found a way to do this with just our material without using metal. And what that really drives that is that if you do get to a point where patients need a revision, we haven't put this in people and followed them for 20 years. So we truly don't know, right? If people do need a revision at some point, our material behaves like tissue. So you can, even though the material will still be present, you can drill through it, you can ream it out, scrape it out. And it's just surrounded and integrated with tissue. There isn't metal or hard ceramic or something else. And that's really important because those metal-based implants, your only option to revise them is going to be, at a minimum, a partial knee replacement.
Totally.
In our case, if there is a failure at some point, it can be revised with something else, like an osteochondral allograft, or maybe even one of these other products, or maybe even a product that we can develop.
Yeah.
Using our technology.
So next steps, you're looking into, you've got to take this into a clinical trial setting. Talk to us about your strategy here, your control. What sort of study are you setting up? How long is it going to take? Give us a little insight into kind of what you're trying to demonstrate in your clinical trial.
Yeah, for sure. So the FDA wants to see a safety study, and then they want to see a randomized trial. So, and I think that's probably true for most medical devices that are PMA. In our case, the safety study is pretty straightforward. It's just single arm Nanochon treatment with a 1-year primary endpoint. So we are collecting anecdotal evidence from these 10 patients that'll be in the study, mainly looking at the pain and function scoring that are what the FDA wants to see as the primary endpoint still in a randomized trial. So it's not some diagnostic, it's not something you can get out of a blood draw. It's literally the surgeon takes the patient through an outcome reporting questionnaire, and there's a couple different flavors of these reporting systems that different orthopedic societies have put together and endorsed, right? So doing those types of evaluations, and also doing a lot of MRI. We still a lot from MRI, especially with technology like this, where rehabbing the tissue and growing something. So MRI is also important. So that first safety study, we're hoping to get that off the ground here in the next couple of months. We're doing it with a great clinical site in Canada. So like I said, 10 patients, 1 year. Beyond that, we will be looking to do a true randomized trial, multi-center trial, to specifically compare our device to a standard of care cohort. And so it's a little interesting because even though we're regenerative technology and that's really where the science comes out of, we are not under CBER, which is the biologics arm of the FDA. We really are viewed as a device because at the end of the day, we're really an implant minimum. So we are under CBRH, which kind of regulates more traditional medical devices, and they sort of consider microfracture, but also other microfracture-like procedures to be the standard of care. So it's not some other implant. It's not one of the biologics we talked about. They want to see non-inferiority and potentially superiority to those types of frontline treatments where you're just cleaning out the damaged cartilage, not necessarily replacing it with anything. So that would need to be a 1 to 2 year study. Typically, the FDA likes 2 years, but there actually is some historical precedent of them saying that they might provisionally approve things at 1 year if the sponsor agrees that they'll continue to follow up for at least 2 years. But a little bit of word of advice for any listeners, once you finish the FDA, you're not over. So regardless of what we end up negotiating with the FDA, we actually want to follow our patients for 5 years because you need that data to convince payers and potentially get new coding, although we think that there's existing codes we can fall under, so that's good. But even so, having the 5-year data really helps you, can increase the value of your product and so on. So either way, we're planning to do a minimum of 1 year, but potentially a 2-year study for the FDA. So that would put us at commercializing, having approval and being ready to commercialize in the first half of 2029.
Sounds great. Yeah, it makes sense. All the best on running your clinical trial. Though that's a whole new stage for your company, and those are also fraught with challenges and require a different kind of patience, but patience nonetheless.
I would love to come back a year from now to do a follow-up episode. So,
oh yeah, after you finish your safety trial, we'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, for sure.
We'd love to hear, because again, I think you're solving a really important problem. It sounds like you're solving it very uniquely. And now it's time to show what you have, right? And the best way to do it is through a clinical trial. So we wish you all the best in that. Absolutely. And is there anything else you'd like to cover, Ben? Or we're so glad to have you on the show today.
Yeah, no, honestly, it was a real pleasure to be here and just, again, chat about my journey. And if nothing else, share some of the things I've learned all along the way with listeners who might want to glean some wisdom. So I'm always happy to share that and share my knowledge.
Awesome. Well,
Awesome,
congratulations on what you've built so far. This is going to be a great lesson, I think, for
our
audience to hear the grit and the grind, as we like to say in Memphis, of getting to the point where you are now. So congratulations. Where can people find you, Ben?
Yeah, look, they can find Nanochon online at nanochon.com. They can find me on LinkedIn. We're not really too active on Twitter or any other social media platforms. We are launching a YouTube channel, which I think might already be up. So if you want to find out more about Nanochon, definitely look at some of our posts on LinkedIn, but also you can check us out on YouTube.
Awesome.
Great. All right. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of MedTech Jam Session with Chris and Mike D. Chris, Ben, thanks so much, my friends.
Thank you, man. Great show.
Everybody.